Okay. Okay, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Shavua. Hope you're having a wonderful week, whether you're in New York or in Florida, wherever you might be. I hope you're all enjoying your week as we count down to Purim. This Friday and Shabbos is Chodesh Adar. Shenichnas Adar Ma'arvin b'Simcha. So last week in Shul, we read the Ten Commandments, Parshat Yitro. We read Aseret HaDibros, it's the Ten Commandments. One of the greatest revelation that God did for the Jews and for the world, giving of the Torah. And it was a great fanfare, 10 Commandments, and the whole thing that it came with it, as the Torah itself expresses the unbelievable revelation that even the Medrash says that the Jewish people heard the first commandment, and they all passed out, they died, and then God revived them, and there was a second time, and they all passed out. So this was an unbelievable revelation. This was truly an unbelievable revelation. And from there, we come to this week's Parshat, Parshat Mishpatim, which Mishpatim means laws. So if you thought that there was only 10 commandments, most people, when you ask them how many commandments there are, they say 10 commandments. Make a big mistake, because right from Parshat Yitro, we go to Parshat Mishpatim, which means these are the laws. And Rashi says, Ve'ela Mishpatim, Ve'ela, and these are the laws, comes to tell us that everything was given on Mount Sinai. Just come to add that what was given on Mount Sinai. You shouldn't think that 10 commandments were given on Mount Sinai and the rest of it was, so to say, I don't know, somebody came up with. But every commandment, the 613 commandments, were all given at Mount Sinai. We're given the entire Torah. So this is, we have the whole Torah, and we go into the Torah learning. You read the Chitas, you're learning Chitas of the day. You're going to see so many unbelievable laws in the Torah, laws between man and man, and even some laws between man and God. So let's start off the Parsha. This is how the Parsha starts off. If you have the book, it's on page 79 in your in this Day of Life book. If you don't have a book, you can open up a Chumash. We are holding on Shemais, Exodus, chapter 21, verse 2. He goes from verse 2, and then 5 and 6. What does the Torah start off with in this week's portion? Eila Mishpatim, these are the laws. So the Torah starts off with an interesting law. Ki sikne eved ivri. First, I want to say this is a sikh of the Rebbe. So this is the teaching of the Rebbe. So it's a beautiful sikh of the Rebbe. So ki sikne eved ivri. The Torah says, if you're going to buy a Jewish slave, what's the law? It's 6 years you shall work with him. On the 7th year, you have to let him out free. And the Torah goes on a little bit about this law. And then he says in a couple of verses later, that means that every slave, if you buy a Jewish slave, simple law is you can buy him only for 6 years. After the 6 years, he has to be let out. Beginning of the 7th year. What happens if the slave says, now the Torah continues in verse number 5, Im Ama Yoima Evet, if the slave will come and will say, I want to be a slave. I like it here. I got the room and board. My master is a great guy. I want to stay here. As Ishti, as Bana, happy. I'm happy here, living here with my wife, my children. Why should I leave? I like slavery. So the Torah says, he has to bring him to the court. That's in general when it says it means to the court. The court, the judges in the court bring him over to a doorpost, or a mezuzah, to a lentil. And you give him like an ear hole, an earring. And now he can become a servant forever. And even when it says forever, it doesn't mean forever. Rashi right away says, it's a Gemara, the Talmud says, that it means for till the year of Jubilee. So we know that the Jubilee started to be counted from when the Jewish people went out of Mitzrayim. They counted 7 years, 7 times 7, 7 years in a cycle of 7 years. 7 times 7 is 49. And the 50th year was the year of Jubilee. That's later in Leviticus. And the Torah says the year of Jubilee was a year that everything was let free. All slaves were let free. Also, property was sold till the year of Jubilee. In Torah law, if you sold your property in Israel, you only could sell it till the year of Jubilee. It's not up to, it means it's a 50th year, but not from when you sold it, but from the cycle of the years of Jubilee. So if I sold my field, and Jubilee was going to be in 2 years from now, I sold it for 2 years. If it was going to be in 50 years from now, I sold it for 50 years. So it was basically, that was the law of the Torah. In essence, you can never sell your field forever. So too, a slave that wanted to stay longer could never be a slave forever. It's until the year of Jubilee. So the maximum you can be a slave is 50 years, is 49 years, until you have the 50th year. That's the basic law in the Torah. He skipped a couple of verses because the Torah goes into a maid serving, the maid, whatever. But that's the basic law. We start off, think about it. We just imagine the Jewish people have just come out of Egypt 50 days ago. They had a revelation at Mount Sinai. And now Moses is telling them, okay, guys, let's learn the law. Let's sit down and learn the law. And what's the law? You are not allowed, if you buy a Jewish slave. Are you serious? What? Is this the first law? Why would that be the first law? That's really the question. What is it important that this should be the first law of the Torah? Right after the 10 Commandments, this is the first law. Buying a Jewish slave. So the Rebbe asked the question in 3 different ways, in a way. What's the relevance? What is important? And is it practical? So what's so the question is, first, is it relevant? Is it relevant, the Jewish people leaving Egypt, to talk to them about buying slaves? And not only buying a Jewish slave. Is it relevant to talk to the Jewish people leaving Mitzrayim that, you know what? I'm going to teach you the law of buying a slave. Why isn't it relevant? Why isn't it relevant? So we know that the Jewish people left Egypt with gold and silver, and the Gemara says each Jew had 50 donkeys full of gold and silver. Who is buying or selling themselves as a slave? So that's number one. What's the relevance? Why, if the Matan Torah, does God have to give them that law? So look at text number 2. It says openly, text number 2, It says in Shemais, chapter 12, verse 35 and 36, it says, and the children of Israel fulfilled Moses' instruction. They borrowed from Egypt silver and golden objects and garments, and God gave favor in the eyes of the Egyptian, and the Egyptian lent them, and the Jewish people emptied out Egypt. So you might say maybe there was one Shlemazel who didn't go ask his neighbor for gold. So therefore, we know there's a medrash. The medrash says in text number 13, the medrash says, when the Jewish people left Egypt, Pharaoh pursued them. Pharaoh adorned his army horses with diamonds and gems. And when they reached the Red Sea and drowned, all the diamonds and all the gems rose to the surface and washed up to the shore, where they lay abandoned. For days, Jews made their way to the shore and collected all these valuables. So what's relevant? Why would God, if they had all this money, who would need to sell themselves as a slave after going out of Egypt? Maybe in Israel, we're coming to Israel and down the road. But at this present time, why is it relevant to the Jewish people going out of Egypt to tell them about slavery? The question's even deeper, the Rebbe says. The question goes a step further. Not only the questions in its relevance, but why is it important to tell the Jewish people this? They just came out of slavery. They just left slavery 50 days ago. And the Gemara says in text number 4, this is a very interesting Gemara, page 81 in your book. The Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yitzchak, said, when the commandment, which commandment does a passage refer to when it reads, and God spoke to Moses and Aaron and instructed them about the children of Israel. This is in the book of Exodus. It says like this verse, God told Moses and Aaron, and he commanded them on the Jews. Doesn't say anything in the verse what he commanded them. So the Medrash, the Gemara says, the Gemara Yerushalmi, the Gemara says that God commanded the Jews to let go their slaves, to free their own Jewish slaves. That means there were Jews in Egypt that were slaves that owned slaves. Jewish slaves, their own brethren. And God said, you gotta get rid of your slaves. It's just not, I want you to get rid of all slavery. I want slavery to come to an end. And if you want to go out free and be free, you got to give up your slaves. That sounds, and then 50 days later, he tells them about buying Jewish slaves. What's going on over here? Here he asked them to get rid of their slaves. And here, the forced law, he talks to them about slaves, buying slaves, acquiring slaves, and how long you're allowed to acquire it for, and what are you allowed to do, etc., etc. So what's going on over here? And the question goes even further on. If you look at text number 5, you see in Jeremiah. In Jeremiah, we have a prophecy. What's the prophecy? It says, page 81 in your book, the word of God comes to Jeremiah, and he's saying, so says God of Israel, I made a covenant with your fathers on the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves, saying, every man at the end of 7 years, release your Jewish brothers who has been sold to you. When he has served for 6 years, give him his freedom. That means he told them in Egypt, give them their freedom. Let your slaves go. I'm taking you out of Egypt. let your slaves go. So the question is, why is it important? And is it insensitive? Even is it the truth is it's sensitive to talk to the Jewish people about slavery? Jews who've just come out of slavery, to talk to them about slavery. So really the question is it sensitive to talk to them about slavery? Is it relevant? And they knew about it even before they went out of Egypt. They knew about it. They just let go their slaves. So what is he telling them after going out of, after the Torah giving that you should only buy slaves for 6 years? We already know God says in Jeremiah that he told them in Egypt to let go of the slaves and they should only get it for 6 years. So what is the difference? Why does God have to say it again about buying Jewish slaves? This is the general question of why does the whole book of laws, Jewish law, start off a slave is a famous question. And here he's going to give you 3 different answers to this question. 3 different answers, and then he's going to go, and then the Rebbe is going to give his answer. What he feels, al pi Chassidus, according to Kabbalah and Chassidut, what is the answer to this question? And once you give a Chassidic answer, according to Chassidut, that makes it really relevant till today. So when we read the Parsha, you think about yourself, I'm not buying any slaves. So you're not allowed to have any slaves in law, in American law. You're not allowed to own slaves. The slavery has been abolished. So well, what is the meaning of this whole thing? What do I need? I'm learning a Torah portion that has, what is it relevant to me at all? It's very relevant, as you'll soon see. So if you have any question, don't be shy, unmute yourself and ask the question. So this finishes the first part of this is the question in the class. And now we're going to give you 3 answers. Everybody understood the question? Everybody have a question on the question? Or we got that clear. Question, I think, is simple. And I mean, we're going to cut it. It's a very simple, basic question. So going to text number 6, page 82 in your book, he brings down an answer from Nachmanides. Not Maimonides, Nachmanides. And Nachmanides, the Ramban, answers as follows. The Torah begins with the commandment concerning Jewish slaves. Why would he do that? Because the slaves' liberation in the 7th year is reminiscent of our liberation of Egypt. The Torah wanted, in essence, to connect slavery of Egypt to a person's own slavery that he does if he would acquire a slave, which is the first of which you mentioned, the first of the 10 commandments. I am God, your God, who took you out of slavery. It is also reminiscent of creation. God said, just like I want you to keep the Shabbos on the 7th day, reminiscent of creation, I want to connect slavery to creation. And that's why 6 years you're allowed to work with your slave. In the 7th year, you have to let him go. Just like creation. God worked for 6 days and he rested on the 7th day. Since a slave's 7th year is like Shabbos of the sorts, it is when he is freed from serving his master. The slave has an additional liberation date, and that's in the year of Jubilee, if he wants to stay a slave. The year that follows the 7th set of 7s. So when you have 7 set of 7s, like 7 Shabbos, that's the year of Jubilee. So it's all connected. The Ramban says it's all connected to creation. It's all connected to the Shabbos, which is all connected also to the remembrance of going out of Egypt. Actually, on Shabbos, when we make Kiddush, we say Zecha Yetzias Mitzrayim. Because just like the Shabbos is like going out of slavery. It's going out of slavery. 6 days a week you shall work, 7th day you're free. So in essence, we're doing it every Shabbos. 6 days a week we're working hard. 7th day, you got to be let free. So, and again, and that's why if you listen to the Kiddush on Friday night, you're going to say those words. What does Shabbos have to do with remembrance of going out of Egypt? Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's remembrance of going out of Egypt. The Shabbos and Egypt are interconnected. And creation, the Shabbos, Egypt, creation, they're all interconnected. And when I on Friday night, I stop everything and I sit down to the Shabbos table, I say both things. It's a remembrance of creation and it's a remembrance of going out of Egypt. And so, the first mitzvah that Ramban says is the mitzvah of slavery. That if a person is going to sell himself as a slave, he has to have the day of Shabbos. Thus, because the distinction and because the law of slavery parallels important themes of creation, they were chosen to be the introductory mitzvah. That's how important to God is Shabbos and creation, and it's all in the concept of slavery, as you see in the first commandment. I am God, your God, who took you out of Egypt. It doesn't say I'm God, your God, who created the world. It said I'm God, your God, who took you out of Egypt. So just like you were in slavery, I took you out of Egypt. So too, if you would hire a slave, you have to let him out of Egypt. At the end of 6 years, you have to let him out of Egypt. So too, you have to let yourself out of Egypt every week. You got to let yourself out of Egypt. Comes the day of Shabbos, you got to let yourself free. Okay, that's one answer. The Ramban's answer. The Ramban's answer. Why was it relevant to them? I don't know, according to the Ramban. Why was it so relevant for them? Maybe they just went out of Egypt. Okay, let's go to the Ibn Ezra's answer in text number 7. The Ibn Ezra, great commentator on Chumash, lived in the 1100s. He said, Ein la'adam yoseh kasher alav. There is nothing more difficult in a human experience when he's bonded to a fellow human being. One of the principles of democracy, freedom. There's nothing more important to a human being that he has his own freedom, that he's the master of his own destiny, that he has free choice. And therefore, God says, before I even open up to any commandments, which commandments were given for humanity, for humans, how to deal with one another, how to treat one another, how even to treat God, you need to put the basic foundation, and that is that there's no more slavery. There's no such thing as a person being a slave. The most it can be for 6 years. The most it can be for 50 years. There's no such thing as slavery anymore. I abolished it in Egypt. In Egypt, there was slave for 210 years. It would be forever if God would not take the Jews out of Mitzrayim. So we say to the Haggadah, if God would have taken out of Mitzrayim, we would still be slaves in Egypt. That's what it says there. Whatever that means. We've been slaves in Egypt forever. God broke slavery. That doesn't mean that you won't be able to sell yourself into servitude, but not slavery. Servitude. You lease yourself for 6 years. You lease yourself for 50, 49 years. But slavery? There's no slavery. And that's why in Jewish law, you always could, how do you say this, renegotiate and buy yourself out. Or somebody can buy you out. Somebody in the family can always come and buy you out. Because you buy a person for 6 years, let's say, you're buying him, let's say you buy him for $1,000. So basically you bought him for $200. I'm sorry, I bought him for $150 a year. Let's give you an example. So a person bought a person the value of what it's going to be for 6 years. So after 2 years, somebody else, or the person himself, can buy himself out. You can always get out of it. Why? Because that's an important thing. The Torah begins with the law of slavery. The Torah says right away that if you're going to buy a slave, there's no such thing as true slavery. There's no such thing as true slavery. Because the truth is, you cannot have the basis of Yiddishkeit or the Torah and anything, a normal society, if you're going to have slavery. If a person is not a mensch anymore, he becomes subservient to another entity. The truth is, that's why Judaism, you don't find the concept of a jail, because it's a form of slavery. The person loses his rights, loses his identity, he becomes a number. There's no such thing in the Torah as you'll see in this week's portion. You steal, you pay back. You might have to pay back double, sometimes 3 times the amount, 4 times the amount, 5 times the amount. But you got to pay back. That's actually the concept of slavery. If you read the Rashi. Rashi says that why would they sell a slave? It's sold by the court. Somebody stole money, and he doesn't have money to pay back, so he sold into slavery, and with the money that the court got from the person who bought him, they would pay back the person he stole from. So there's no concept of and if a person killed somebody, he's put to death. So there was no aspect of a jail sentence in the Torah. There's no such thing. The closest thing that is a jail sentence in the Torah is a city of refuge. If a person killed unintentionally, he has to run to the city of refuge. City of refuge is not a jail. The regular city that had everything normal in a regular city. The only thing is he couldn't leave the city. He was never in a jail where you sat closed in a room and locked in a room and told when to get up and when to go to sleep and what to eat and when to eat. That's not humanity. That's taking away a person's humanity. But we're not here to talk about the jail system. I'm just telling you that the Ramban says that before you want to start to learn the Torah, you got to talk about what makes a human being a human being. And that is freedom. The aspect of freedom. And that's why God starts off right away with the laws of slavery. Answer number 2. Now we come to answer number 3. And that's the Abarbanel in text number 8. The Abarbanel comes up with another answer. Very interesting answer. And it says as follows. On page 84. The Abarbanel says, God gave his nation 10 brief commandments. He said 10 commandments. On Matan Torah, he said 10 commandments. Thou shalt not kill. If you want to talk about, we're talking about the commandments between man and man. That's because the first five is between man and God, and the 5th one is between a kabed and savicha, honor your father and mother. But then it goes into the basic laws: don't kill, don't steal, don't do adultery, don't have jealousy. So he says as follows: God gave his nation 10 brief commandments, but since they were unable to hear the subsets of these commandments, God had to instruct Moshe to teach them these laws. So there comes the Barbanel, and he says the truth is that when you look at, let's say, the law of thou shalt not murder, there's a lot of sub laws to that thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not murder is a general rule. There are many sub laws of that rule. So really, in the 10 commandments, you have all the 613 commandments. That's what the Rabbi now says. You can find in the 10 commandments all the 613 commandments. So it's based on a Gemara. So it was Kalalei Sehem. That's what the Gemara says. On Mount Sinai was given the general rules. And then, slowly but surely, it was taught by Moshe in sub-law. So God had to instruct Moshe, teach them these laws, which are clear sublets of the 10 Commandments. He therefore opened with the word, and these are the laws that you shall place before them, and implies that the laws are a continuation of the 10 Commandments, and these, because it's and these is a continuation of the previous portion, that the 10 Commandments and these, which means that these commandments, which I'm commanding you, are a continuation of the 10 Commandments. Where are they a continuation? They're a continuation because they are sublets of the 10 Commandments. A wise person knows that all these laws and more are contained in the commandments. However, God illustrated his point with these laws and left the wise person to infer that the same applies to all the laws that the Torah eventually elucidates. So that's why there's a general beautiful statement in the Gemara. The Gemara says, Kol mashatal mevasik l'chadesh, anything that any student throughout history, Jewish student, will come and expound on the Torah was already given on Mount Sinai. But Moshe Rabbeinu gave general principles, and the only reason why I or any other student of Torah, any one of us, can come up and expound upon it because already Moshe Rabbeinu gave the general principles. So, every morning we say B'shloisha Esei Midos HaTorah Nedreshes. There are 13. Everybody can be a Talmudic sage if you know the 13 principles, the way the Torah is expounded. So once you know the 13 principles, and that's a general format, and the Gemara gives a format. If you know these 13 principles, it's a beautiful thing. Rabbi Shmuel said 13 principles where the Torah is expounded upon, you'll understand the way the whole Gemara works, because it works basically on these 13 principles. Once you comprehend the 13 principles, you know how to understand how to bring out the law in the Torah. Because the Torah doesn't say every law explicitly. It has to be expounded upon. Without Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Torah law, nobody will know the Torah law. You wouldn't know almost one law for the Torah, what it means. You shall not work on Shabbos. What does work mean? I don't know. What does work mean? It has to be expounded upon in Gemara what the Torah means by work. And the Gemara deduces it in a certain format. So there's a certain format that every law was learned from. And once you got the format, you got the general format, then it's easy to be able to expound on any aspect of the Torah. And each and every one of us can do that. We need to just get the format. Not just a simple format, but it's there. You need to understand the format, the way every word was written, every letter was written, klal uprat, the general and the singular. It's fascinating. And we say it every day in our davening before Haidu. So let's take one case, the first of the 6 commandments, the second part of the tablets, which is between man and man. Thou shalt not murder. So the Gemara says murder is a general concept. Murder. There's a lot of things that go onto sublet under the concept of murder. So one of them is slavery. Slavery is a concept of murder. If you take a person and you put him into slavery, you're basically murdering him. You're taking his life away from him. If you hurt somebody, parent, in total law, if I hurt my parent physically, it's equivalent to murder. If I curse my parent, is equivalent to murder. It's the concept of murder. And therefore, in the Torah law, if somebody curses his parent, or somebody hits his parent and hurts him, he's put to death. Because it's equivalent to murder. In a smaller way, for example, the Gemara says embarrassing somebody is equivalent to murder. I said in a smaller way because you're not put to death in that kind of situation. But in essence, the Gemara says that's why his blood runs up, he gets red. It's equivalent to murder. Kidnapping somebody. You know when the Torah says, thou shalt not steal. In the Torah, in the 10 Commandments, that's murder. That's kidnapping somebody. It's equivalent to murder. It's like slavery. Killing a slave. Now you have the law of not stealing. If you want to go to the law of not stealing, now you can go in the law of not stealing. Oh, baby, now you have so many subdivisions of the law of not stealing. That's damages and ox goring ox and person goring ox and whatever, go on and on and on. So you have a general law, and then you have sublets. So that's why the Barbanel says that the Torah starts off with the law of slavery because he does end it off, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill. And he wanted to tell people, he wanted to tell Jews that you should know that selling a person to slavery is almost like killing him. Even though you're not put to death if you sell a person to slavery. That's like embarrassing something you're not put to death. You're not put to death if you buy a slave. But if you want to know what you're doing, you're killing him. And therefore, you cannot really sell a slave. You cannot really buy a slave because there's no such thing of buying a slave forever. So here we gave you 3 answers. What does anyone want to say something on these 3 answers? We gave you 3 answers of why the Torah starts off with slavery. We have the Ramban, we have the Ibn Ezra, and now I gave you they gave you the answer of the Abarbanel. Beautiful answers, truly beautiful answers. The Rebbe, yeah. Anybody want to ask a question? Anybody want to say something? Ask a question, or everybody's happy. I love this class. Everybody's happy. I only see smiley faces and no faces at all. Okay. So the Rebbe says, okay, these are all good answers, but there's missing something in all these answers. Because why is it important to us right now? Sure, today. What is so important to us, this law of slavery? Even according to all these answers, what does that have to do with us? We don't have slavery today. Slavery has been abolished. No slavery, Baruch Hashem. Which Jew is buying a slave? So what does it do with us? How do we connect as Jews? We read the Parsha, if the Matan Torah, we come to this week's portion, boom, Don't buy a slave, buy a slave. You can have it for 6 years, up to 50. Well, what does that have to do with us? How do I, as a Jew, connect to this law? Most Jews are uncomfortable even to talk about it. You know, they're buying a slave and how long you allowed to own him. It's a very uncomfortable subject. So why would the Torah start off with it? So the Rabbi goes and gives a beautiful answer, Apichsidis. And I have 15 minutes to give you this answer. The Rabbi says that the law of slavery, this law comes to teach us something very, very deep. And since it's something extremely deep, it affects us and it's important to us in every single mitzvah we do. So in essence, if the Torah puts the law of slavery as the first law, the Torah wants to say that in this law you have all the laws, and in this law emphasizes why you should do all the laws of the Torah. Because if you listen into the Parsha, if you listen to the first verse, Eila Mishpatim asher tosim lifneim, these are the laws that you should put before them. And Rashi says a very interesting thing. It says, why lifneim? Why say you should put before them? Where you should put it? Put it before them. What does that mean? What does it mean you should put before them? You shouldn't put it behind them. Put it in front of them. What does it mean you should put it before them? Rashi says it means k'shulchan aruch. It means you have to put it before them like a set table. That means that when you set a table with food and you invite people over to eat, you don't put flour and raw chicken and raw potatoes and raw tomato and raw vegetables. You make it for them. K'shulchan aruch. It needs to be a person comes to the table. He's going to eat bread. He's going to have cooked chicken. He's going to eat cooked meat. He's going to have cooked potatoes, mashed potatoes. He's going to eat it. He'll be able to eat it. Why is it important that people eat it? So they'll understand it. That means it's made for them. That means in the Torah law, you can look at it as one way. Here's the law. Go do with it what you want with it. Take it or leave it. Or take it, you can't leave it. You know what I mean? You could say that's one way the law. Here's the law. It's a godly law. Take it and you're stuck with it. No. The Torah right away starts off and says, no. I want you to teach them the law like they can eat it. So I want them to learn the law that it becomes like part of them. They comprehend it. They enjoy it. I want them to live with it. I don't want to just command law and they have to take it. And that's why the Shulchan Aruch, what is the code of Jewish law called in Hebrew? Shulchan Aruch. That's where the name came from. The code of Jewish law is not called law. It's called Shulchan Aruch, a set table. Because Torah law needs to be for each and every one of us that we are like in a set table, that we should come and learn the law. We should realize the importance of the law. We should be connected to the law. We should comprehend the law. We can even argue with the law. But the importance is to come and get involved in Jewish law. If the Torah didn't want every Jew to get involved in Jewish law, he wouldn't write a Parshat Mishpatim. Because really, all this law is for judges. How many people are going to be judges? Abishter wanted everybody, whether you're going to be a rabbi or you're going to be a judge, or you're not going to be a rabbi, you're never going to be in Jewish court, you still need to learn the law. Everybody should learn the laws of the Torah and learn the laws of an ox goring an ox. Learn the laws of like we learned today in the morning, learn the laws of watchmen. Learn these laws. Get involved in the law. Get involved. Because in every law of the Torah has its pshat, remedial side. In every law of the Torah has its basic law and it has its beauty. It's because the Torah is alive. The law is alive. So every law has its spiritual side to it. So every Jew, whether you're going to be a judge, whether you're ever going to be involved in any of these laws, there's a spiritual side to every law. So every person can connect himself to that spiritual side. And therefore, every one of us should learn Parshat Mishpatim. It was not given over to courts. It was not given over to rabbis. It was given over to every person, like to a 5-year-old child. We should all learn the law. And the way the Eibishter God wanted to emphasize this importance, that every person shouldn't think, oh, why am I going to get involved in it? I'm not going to be involved in courts. No, this is godly law. It's given to every person, and every one of us should get involved with it, learn it, try to comprehend it, and even try to find out its ethical and moral teachings from it. And it should be for everybody. So Moshe Rabbeinu, God says to Moshe Rabbeinu to roll it out in front of them, not only to the rabbis or the leaders or the judges, everybody. Roll it out in front of them. Let every person taste it on his level, right? Even in the time of the going on the desert, there were children, there were teenagers, there were older people, there were judges. Every person needs to eat out of it. Make sure you do your job correctly, and make sure you teach everybody these laws on their level and what it learns to them, what it means to them. And that's where God wanted that every person should learn Torah, what it means to me and what it means to you. And that's why he underlined the first law, the law of Eved Ivri, the law of a slave. So let's look at the Gemara. The Rebbe brings the Gemara and then the Rebbe says it. So the Rebbe says, text number 9, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai would interpret this verse in a beautiful manner. Why is the ear singled out of all the limbs of the body? Why, when this guy wants to be a slave more than 6 years, why does the Torah say that you should make a hole in his ear or her ear? Why does the Torah say you make a hole in the ear? Why not in his foot? Why not in his nose? Give him an ear nose ring. Why in his ear? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai said, God said on Mount Sinai, the ear that heard me proclaim, for the children of Israel are my slaves, not slaves of slaves. Then this person went and acquired a master for himself. Let his ear be pierced. So here, and the Rebbe says, wow, this is unique than anything else in the Torah. This is unique than any other mitzvah in the entire Torah. And look at the words of the Rebbe in text number 10, which is page 86. Let's just use the words of the Rebbe. If you have it, the book, good. If not, listening to me. The Torah does not usually emphasize a link between a reward of a mitzvah and the mitzvah. For example, reward for honoring your parents is longevity. Torah says you're going to have a long life. What's the connection? What's the connection? I honor my father and mother and have a long life. What does one thing have to do with the other? How do they go together? What would be different if you say, if you honor your father and mother, you'll be a millionaire. If you honor your father and mother, you have a long life. Either one is wonderful. There's no really connection. I don't see the connection. First of all, that's the only one of the mitzvahs that the Torah gives you a reward. Most mitzvahs on the Torah doesn't give you a reward. There's no connection, right? Usually we live a life in our lives. We have connections. We see connections. We go to work. No one wants to go to work. You go to work, you get paid. Now you can have a house, and so there's a connection. You eat something good, there's a connection, you feel good. Where's the connection in any mitzvah of the Torah? You put on tefillin, what happens? What happens? Something's going to happen. You eat kosher, something's going to happen. So that's going to cost you more money. What's going to happen? Do you see? You make the connections. There's no connections. So how can I create excitement when I'm not making the connections? I'm not making connections. I need to be able to make this connection. So here we have a mitzvah of the Torah that the Torah makes the connection. The Torah makes a connection between the slave and his heir. The Torah doesn't say, "Oh, you know what? You want to be a slave for more? Make a hole in your foot. I don't know, make a hole in your nose. Put your nose ring in." Then you say, "What's the connection?" So it's like any other mitzvah in the Torah. There's no connection. Here the Torah says there is a connection. The Jew that heard that he shouldn't be a slave, that he's a slave of God. If God took him out of slavery and made a slave and said that every Jew is a slave to him, now he goes and sells himself as a slave to somebody else. He shall make an earring in his hair. He didn't hear it well. Seemingly something he didn't hear. There was a miscommunication. Every mitzvah is a connection. Every mitzvah there's a connection. Every avera there's a disconnection. And where do we learn that? We learned that from this mitzvah, from the mitzvah of a slave, that there's a connection. You got to find the connections. A Jew should not only do Torah mitzvahs because he's commanded to do it, because he sees the connections. He sees the beauty in it. He sees the gain. And he shouldn't do a sin because he sees the negative. The Rebbe would always say, what's the difference between emunah and betachan? Or betachan and emunah. Faith and trust. Faith is when I have no connections. I'm just saying I believe. I have faith. I don't know why. I have faith. Trust is when I say no, I trust. I know why. I know why I trust the Eibishter. Either I have proof to, I have experience that I trust God. It's a connection. When I say I trust God, it means because I have this connection with the Eibishter. I don't just have a faith in God, which faith means it's a buff understanding, but trust is I have an understanding in why I'm doing it. I have a trust because I have this relationship. I have this connection. So let's continue to read the words of the Rebbe. The same is true with sin. We don't see specific links between the sin and the punishment they incur. What's the connection? Like I just said, you curse your father and mother. Torah says you put to death. What's the connection? I don't see the connection. Or if you hurt your father, you hurt him, you put to death. I can tell you kill somebody, you put to death. But I hurt somebody, somebody curses their father, we put him to death. What's the connection? The law of slavery are different. For in this instance, the Torah links the punishment with what caused it. The Torah says, you know what caused your slavery? Because you weren't listening. What caused your slavery? Because you weren't listening. The truth is, what causes our disconnection? Because we're not listening. What causes every disconnection? We're not listening. What causes every connection? Because we're attentive. We're focused. We're involved. If we're not involved, we'll never make the connections. That's why we say every day at our davening, Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel. You have to hear. You have to want to hear. if we don't want to hear and we don't want to make those connections, then how are you gonna make the connections? It's gonna come to you, something from heaven is gonna fall on your lap. And you think God's gonna come and reveal himself to you? You're gonna become a prophet? No. The Eibush says, I gave you the Torah, I gave you the capability with your seichel to make the connections. And the more you can make these connections, the more you'll be able to see the gains and chas v'shalom on the sins and negatives. This helps us understand why the law of slavery were the first to be taught after God gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai. In the punishment for this law, we see a clear and obvious link, one that is manifest in the physical body between the law of Mount Sinai. We see the connection. A slave who sold himself many years later, he sold himself after Mount Sinai, but we connected it to Mount Sinai. The Eibishter wants that every mitzvah we do and every sin that we don't do should all be connected to Mount Sinai. Should all be connected because we have emunah and bitachon in God. That's why we do every mitzvah. And that's why we don't do any averos, hopefully. Because we have a relationship, we understand that the Eibishter wants a connection with us and we want a connection with him. And we don't do a sin because God doesn't want to disconnect with us and we don't want to disconnect with him. And it all comes through our hearing, the capability of us hearing the message or us not hearing the message. So the Rebbe, in essence, says, and that's how this Parsha, this law becomes extremely relevant to each and every one of us. That we should learn the law, the first law of the Torah. These are the laws that you shall put in front of them. Make it for them clear. Let them eat like food that they'll understand. They'll see the positive and they'll see the negative. They'll feel it. They'll taste it. They'll taste the positive and they'll taste what means not to do a negative thing. And I'll give them the analogy of a slave, that they'll understand the law of a slave. The Torah says you shouldn't never sell a person a slave forever. It's impossible to sell a person a slave. But even to sell yourself for 6 years, or even to sell yourself for 50 years, is something that God says, why would a Jew do that? Why in the world would a Jew sell himself for 50 years? If he would listen to God, why would he sell himself to 6 years? The only reason he sold himself to 6 years is because he stole money. He stole money and he cannot pay it back. And now he has to go and sell himself a slave. If he would listen and he would trust the Eibishter, believe in God and trust in God, he would never come, God forbid, to even sell himself as a slave for 6 years. Why would a person give himself over for 50 years? If not that he didn't listen with his ears to the concept of our trust and emunah in the Eibishter, our relationship with God, our connection to God. With our ears, we would never come to any of these things, and we'd only come to positive concepts. And that's how the Rebbe explains. In a small package, he only took one paragraph. It's the whole sikh of the Rebbe. That's how the Rebbe explains why, according to Chassidut, why the Torah starts off with the law of slavery. As I said, there are many, many more commentators to why the Torah starts off with the law of slavery. I just gave you 4 different commentators: the Ramban, the Ibn Ezra, the Abarbanel, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Chassidut. Why we start off this parsha and all the laws of the Torah with the concept of law of slavery. The Rebbe, in essence, says, because the truth is, the law of slavery is in every mitzvah you do. That's really, if you understood what I said. The law of slavery is in every mitzvah that you do. You can do every mitzvah because you're just a slave, or you can do every mitzvah because you heard, you understood it, you comprehended it, you got the emunah and bitachon, you got the trust and faith in why you're doing this mitzvah. So you can do the mitzvah as a slave because God says so, and okay, better than nothing. Or don't be a slave. Be free. Do the mitzvah because you connect the connections. You see the connections. You comprehend the connections. You see the beauty in every mitzvah that God asks us to do. You see the negative. I see the negative. I see the negative in every avera that God asked me not to do. So I have my free choice. In my freedom, I've heard the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to say. Not only in the law of slavery, but I've heard the voice of God in every mitzvah and every positive commandment that God asked me to do, and in every negative commandment that God asked me not to do. And again, so that's the beauty that Rebbe says. It's not that God put slavery because the Jews were not in Mitzrayim, or because he didn't want them to have slaves, no, because he wanted every one of us to learn from this law how they should do every mitzvah in the Torah. Do it because you're free people, and you're doing it because you understand it, and you comprehend it, and you see the beauty in it, and you enjoy it. That's a Shulchan Aruch. That's a set table. You enjoy it. And not only you enjoy it, but you actually give other people that they should enjoy it. You teach others how to enjoy it. And they will enjoy it too. And that's why the Torah starts with the law of slavery. I hope I explained it well, my best of my ability. I hope you got it. You got the geschmack of this sikha, what the Rebbe wanted to teach us. And I hope we'll live with the Parsha. And in general, you should learn Mishpatim. It's fascinating laws. Most of these laws you'll never find in any civil law book in American law. It's such beautiful Jewish law that is found nowhere in the world. So God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening. I want to remind everybody that this Thursday night, we continue to the JLI class, the Journey of the Soul, which is also a fascinating class. And I think I have 3 books left in the Chabad house. So if you want a book, you can still get, I think I have 3 books left. Call the office tomorrow and you can pick up the book tomorrow or Wednesday or Thursday. Tomorrow is Wednesday or Thursday. And then Thursday at 7:30, we'll continue the second class of Journey of the Soul, which is also a fascinating, wonderful, beautiful class. Even if you don't have a book, you're welcome to come to the class and listen in on Zoom or come to Chabad. Have a beautiful, happy, wonderful night. Tomorrow, 8 a.m., we continue to learn Chitas. So you're welcome to come and learn Chitas with us tomorrow morning, which is the 4th part of Parshat Mishpatim. Anybody have a quick question? Anybody have a question?
Toda Rabbi.
Thank you very much, whoever that is.
Thank you,
Mark.
Rabbi. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. God bless you. Pleasure. Learning never ends.
Thank you very much. Always
Thank
a
you.
pleasure to listen to you.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very nice of you. Thank you. Have a good night, guys. Sleep tight.